3 days before my husband's funeral, I found out my son had already changed the locks on our lake house. I didn't learn this from him. I learned it from Eleanor Marsh, who had been cutting my hair for 31 years. She sat me down in her chair, looked at me in the mirror, and said, "Margaret, I need to tell you something before you hear it somewhere else. Sit still and listen to me." I thought she was going to tell me my color was wrong. I had no idea my life was about to split in two. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And I want you to know that while this story is my own, some details have been changed to protect those still involved in ongoing legal matters. The emotions, the choices, the consequences, those are all real. Eleanor put down her scissors. She turned off the water. She walked to the front of the salon, flipped the sign to closed, and came back to me. In 22 years of coming to that salon, I had never seen her close early for anything. "Your son was in here Tuesday," she said quietly. "With that woman." That woman. She meant Diane. My son Nathan's wife of 4 years. A woman I had genuinely tried to love. "They didn't know I was in the back doing inventory," Eleanor said. "Nathan was on his phone," he said, "and I'm telling you exactly what I heard he said. The attorney confirmed it this morning. Once the estate goes to probate, we move. She won't fight it. She's too destroyed right now." I stared at myself in the mirror. I was 68 years old. My husband of 41 years, Robert, had died 11 days ago. A stroke. "Quick," the doctor said, as if that was supposed to help. I was still sleeping in my clothes because I couldn't face our bedroom alone. And my son was talking to an attorney about my estate before his father was even in the ground. "There's more," Eleanor said. She handed me a glass of water. I hadn't realized my hands were shaking until I tried to hold it. Diane said, "What about the Portland property?" And Nathan said, "That's the easy one. She already trusts me with the deed." The Portland property. My name. My signature. My inheritance from my own mother. Left to me alone when she passed in 2019. A small craftsman house on a quiet street that I had rented out for 6 years and never once asked Nathan to manage. Except that last January, when Robert was in the hospital for his first episode and I was barely sleeping, Nathan had come to me with a stack of papers. "Mom, you need to simplify things," he'd said. "So calm, so reasonable. Let me help you manage the Portland rental while Dad's sick. Just a temporary power of attorney for the property. So I can handle tenants if something comes up." I had signed it without reading past the first page. I set the water glass down on Eleanor's counter. I looked at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was gray-haired, hollow-eyed, wearing Robert's old cardigan because I hadn't been able to take it off in a week. She looked like someone who could be taken from. I decided, right then, that she was not. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out steady in a way that surprised me. Eleanor put her hand on my shoulder. "I almost didn't tell you. I wasn't sure. But then I thought, what if someone had told me before my sister's husband did what he did? What if someone had just said something?" I covered her hand with mine. "You did the right thing." She nodded, eyes wet. "What are you going to do?" I picked up my purse. I looked at myself one more time. I'm going to find out exactly what I signed. The drive home took 14 minutes. I used every one of them to go back through the last year in my mind. Robert's first stroke had been mild. January 14th. He'd recovered well, went back to his studio by March. He was a furniture maker, had been since we moved to Ashland, Oregon in 1991. Custom pieces, mostly for clients in Portland and San Francisco. The workshop behind our house still smelled like cedar and linseed oil. I couldn't go in there yet. The second stroke had been September 3rd. He never fully came back from that one. By November, he was home on hospice. Nathan came to visit twice. Both times, he stayed 3 days, helped around the house, cooked dinner, and spent long evenings talking to Robert in the living room while I cleaned up. I had been grateful. I had thought. My son came when we needed him. Now, I was thinking about what they talked about during those evenings. What Robert might have said when he was tired and medicated and not quite himself. What Nathan might have written down. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car. Robert had built this house with his own hands mostly. We'd bought the lot in 1993, lived in a rental for 2 years while he worked on weekends and evenings. The wraparound porch, the stone fireplace, the kitchen he'd redesigned 3 times until I was happy with it. We had raised Nathan here. We had buried our dog here, under the apple tree. We had slow danced in the kitchen to Patsy Cline more times than I could count. I was not going to lose this house. I went inside, sat at Robert's desk in the study, I still couldn't think of it as mine, and opened his filing cabinet. Everything was labeled in his handwriting, careful and neat. I found the folder for the Portland property. I found the original deed. And I found a copy of what I had signed in January. It wasn't a temporary property management authorization. It was a durable power of attorney for all real property held in my name, with no expiration date. I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still and let the silence of the house settle around me. 41 years of photographs on the walls. Robert's reading glasses still on the side table. A coffee mug he'd used the morning he died, still in the dish rack because I hadn't been able to wash it. I had trusted my son. I had signed a document I didn't read because I was afraid and exhausted, and I needed someone to lean on. And he had used that. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. Carol Whitfield had handled our estate planning since 2008. She was 70 herself, sharp as anyone I'd ever met, with a no-nonsense manner that Robert had loved and her clients depended on. When I told her what Eleanor had heard and what I had found in the filing cabinet, she was quiet for a long moment. "Come in tomorrow morning," she said. "First thing. And Margaret, don't sign anything. Don't take any calls from Nathan tonight if you can manage it, and do not let anyone into that house. Do you think he'd actually—" "I think," Carol said carefully, "that a durable POA on real property, combined with a probate window and a grieving spouse, is a very specific set of circumstances. And I've seen this before." She paused. "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear right now." "No," I said. "It's exactly what I needed to hear." I barely slept. I lay in our bed with Robert's pillow against my chest and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember every conversation with Nathan over the past year. The small comments. "Mom, you shouldn't have to manage all this alone. Dad would want you to simplify. Diane and I could help you more if we had more access." I had heard concern. I was now hearing something else entirely. At some point after midnight, my phone buzzed. Nathan, a text. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you holding up? Diane and I were thinking we could come down this weekend to help you start going through some of Dad's things. Let us know." I read it twice. Going through Dad's things, the workshop, the filing cabinets, the desk where I had just found the power of attorney document. I typed back, "I'm okay. This weekend doesn't work. I'll call you soon." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Of course, take care of yourself." I put the phone face down on Robert's side of the bed. Carol's office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown, above a coffee shop that had been there since the 90s. I arrived at 7:45. She was already at her desk. She had pulled up the document before I arrived. She walked me through it line by line, the way you explain something to someone who is both intelligent and in shock, which is what I was. "The POA is valid," she said. "You signed it, it was witnessed, it's on record. But here's what it doesn't cover." She turned the page. "It covers management and leasing decisions for real property. It does not authorize sale, transfer, or mortgage without additional documentation. If Nathan tries to sell the Portland house, he needs your signature on the sale documents. And if he forged, that's a separate crime." Carol looked at me steadily. "Do you have reason to believe he would go that far?" I thought about Eleanor's words. The easy one. She already trusts me with the deed. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know who my son is right now." Carol leaned forward. "I want to bring in someone. A man named Paul Greer. He's former Oregon DOJ, now private. He does financial forensics. If Nathan has been making moves on your assets, accounts, properties, any of it, Paul will find the trail. But we need to move before the estate enters probate, which will happen in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I repeated. "We don't have long." She handed me a card. "I'm filing a request today to flag the Portland property. Any transfer attempt will trigger a notification to this office. That buys us time." I took the card. Paul Greer. Just a name and a number, like something out of a movie. Except it wasn't a movie. It was my life. The life Robert and I had built over 41 years, and the son we had raised in it, and the question I couldn't stop asking myself on the drive over: when did it start? When did I stop being his mother and become a resource? I called Paul Greer from the parking lot. He answered on the second ring. "I know who you are," he said, before I'd finished explaining. Carol called ahead. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry for your loss. I'd like to meet with you today if that's possible." We met at a diner on the edge of town, a place where no one I knew was likely to be having breakfast at 10 inches the morning on a Tuesday. Paul was 64, gray at the temples, with the deliberate quietness of someone who has spent a career listening carefully. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. "Start from the beginning," he said, "not from Eleanor's salon. From before that." So I told him. Robert's illness, Nathan's visits, the January documents. The lake house keys that no longer worked, I had tried them the week before and assumed the lock was broken, chalked it up to grief brain, hadn't thought twice. I told him about Diane, who had always been pleasant in a way that gave nothing away. I told him about the phone call I had overheard 6 months ago, when I was visiting and walked in from the garden, Nathan saying to someone, "She's not going to live there. It's too big for one person." I had assumed he was talking about a client. I was not a client. Paul wrote in a notebook. No recording device. Just a pen moving in clean, steady lines across the page. "The lake house," he said. "Is it in your name, jointly held, or in Robert's name?" "Joint," I said. "Robert and I, joint tenancy with right of survivorship. It should have passed to me automatically when he died." "It did," Paul said, "which means Nathan cannot sell it without your signature. Changing the locks is trespassing, technically, but not a crime he's likely to be prosecuted for in a grief context. What it tells me is that he's establishing physical control before he has legal control." He paused. "That's a specific kind of thinking. That's not someone acting on impulse." The diner was quiet around us. A couple near the window, a man reading a newspaper at the counter. Normal Tuesday morning in Ashland. My husband had been dead for 11 days, and my son was changing locks. "What are the 3 worst things you might find?" I asked. Paul looked at me. "You want me to speculate?" "I want to be prepared." He considered this. "Financial accounts. If Nathan has any authorized access, even limited, I'd want to look at movement over the past 18 months. Second, the Portland property. I want to see if there's been any contact with buyers or real estate agents under his authority. Third, your husband's business accounts. The workshop, client deposits, any business accounts in Robert's name." He paused. "When someone moves this quickly, they usually have a timeline. Something happening soon that requires the money to be accessible." "What kind of something?" "Debt," he said. "Or an opportunity they can't pass up. Or both." He told me he'd need 48 hours. We'd meet back at Carol's office. He stood, dropped a 20 on the table, and looked at me before he left. "Mrs. Holloway, your husband used to sell pieces to the Whitmore Gallery in Portland. My wife bought a side table from him in 2017. Cherry wood, hand-carved legs." He paused. "Robert Holloway was a man who made things built to last. I'll work fast." I sat alone in the booth for a few minutes after he left. Outside, the October sky was the deep blue that only happens in Southern Oregon in the fall. Robert had loved this time of year. We used to drive the back roads in October just to look at the colors. I thought about what Paul had said. Someone who moves this quickly. Nathan had come home 2 weeks after Robert's first stroke, January of the previous year. He'd sat with me at the kitchen table and said, very gently, "Mom, you and Dad need to think about what happens if things get worse. I'm not trying to be morbid. I just love you both, and I want to be prepared." I had thought that was love talking. I drove home and began, very carefully, to prepare. The next 48 hours, I moved through the house like someone diffusing something. I photographed every document in the filing cabinet. I called Robert's accountant, a man named Dennis Cho who had worked with us since 2003, and asked him to flag any access to our joint accounts. I called the property management company that handled the Portland rental and asked them to confirm, in writing, what instructions they had received from Nathan over the past year. They emailed me back within 2 hours. Nathan had contacted them in March, requesting that future lease renewal negotiations go directly through him. They had complied, assuming this was a family arrangement. The current tenants, a young couple with a baby, had just been offered a reduced renewal rate contingent on a new management agreement. A new management agreement that would have replaced my name with Nathan's. I sat with that email for a long time. My son, 39 years old, grew up in this house, in this town. I had stayed up with him through ear infections and algebra tests and his first real heartbreak. Robert had taught him to drive stick shift in the back parking lot of the Safeway on Oak Street. We had celebrated his college graduation, his master's degree, his wedding. I had stood in a garden in Portland 4 years ago and watched him marry Diane and thought, he chose well, she'll be good for him. I wondered when Diane had learned about this. I wondered whether she had suggested it or whether she'd simply agreed when Nathan brought it to her. I wondered if it mattered. Paul Greer arrived at Carol's office 44 hours after our diner meeting. He set 3 folders on the conference table. I noticed the colors: tan, blue, red. Carol sat across from me. Her assistant had been sent home. "Start with the tan one," Paul said. I opened it. 3 bank statements. Our joint savings account. I scanned the columns. In the 14 months between Robert's first stroke and his death, there had been 11 transfers out, each one between $800 and $1,200, to an account I didn't recognize. "The receiving account is a joint account in Nathan and Diane's names," Paul said. "Opened March of last year. The transfers began in February. They were timed to avoid the threshold that triggers automatic bank review." Carol's jaw was tight. "How much total?" $11,400. He looked at me, small enough to go unnoticed in a household managing a serious illness, large enough to matter. "He had access to that account?" I asked. "You added him as an authorized user in 2018, Paul said, after Robert's workshop fire. "You said in case of emergency while you were traveling." I remembered. The small fire, the insurance paperwork, the chaos. Nathan had helped us manage it. I had added him as a convenience and never removed him. I closed the tan folder. Paul slid the blue one across. "Portland property." I opened it. An email chain. Nathan to a realtor named Stephanie Cross at Windermere, Portland. Subject line: Pre-listing consultation, East Side craftsman, motivated seller. Dated August 3rd. While Robert was still alive. While he was in our living room, in his chair, watching the birds at the feeder I'd hung outside the window because he couldn't go outside anymore. While all of that was happening, my son was having a pre-listing consultation on my mother's house. The email chain went on. 3 meetings scheduled, a preliminary assessment of $487,000. Nathan had told the realtor he expected to complete the sale by end of Q1, January at the latest. He was already in escrow on my mother's house, in the name of his management authority, before his father was buried. I closed the blue folder. "The red one," I said. Paul looked at me. "Take a breath first. Open it." He did it himself and laid the pages out flat so I could see them. A loan document. Nathan Holloway, borrower. Collateral listed. Residential property, Portland, Oregon. Lender: a private equity firm registered in Nevada called Clearwater Capital Partners. Loan amount, $380,000. Origination date, September 18th, 2 weeks after Robert's second stroke. Nathan had used my mother's house as collateral for a private loan while my husband was dying and I was sitting beside his hospital bed. The loan was approved contingent on clear title transfer within 90 days, Paul said. 90 days from September 18th is He looked at me. "That's 6 weeks from now." The room was very quiet. "He needs the Portland sale to close," Carol said, "because he needs to show clear title to the lender, which means he needs your cooperation or a forgery." "Has he approached you about selling it?" Paul asked me. "Not yet," I said, "but he mentioned coming this weekend to go through Robert's things." I thought about the filing cabinets, the desk, everything I'd spent the past 2 days photographing. He was coming for the documents. Carol stood. "We stop this now." Paul looked at me. "What do you want to do with it?" I had thought about this for 2 days. I had lain in my bed at night and thought about Nathan at age 7, running through the sprinkler in the backyard. I had thought about Robert holding him the day he was born. I had thought about every version of the moment when I would have to decide what kind of woman I was going to be. "I want him to answer for this," I said. But I want to know first whether this was entirely his idea. Paul nodded slowly. Diane. She's his wife. She either pushed for this or she agreed to it. I need to know which. Does it change what you do? I thought about it honestly. No. But it changes what I say to him. Carol set down her pen. Here's what I recommend. Robert's memorial service is Saturday. 80 guests, family, friends, colleagues. Nathan will be there. He has to be. And he will be expecting you to be grieving, distracted, and grateful for his presence. She looked at me the way she had looked at me for 15 years of hard decisions and harder documents. We let him think that's exactly what's happening. Right up until it isn't. The memorial service was at the Unitarian Church on Iowa Street, the one with the garden Robert had donated labor to 3 years ago. White flowers because he'd hated black at funerals. His photograph on an easel near the door. I'd chosen the one from our 30th anniversary trip to the coast, where he was laughing at something off camera, his hair blown sideways by the ocean wind. I stood at the door and greeted people for an hour. Former clients, neighbors, people from the woodworking community who had known Robert for decades, Dennis Cho, Eleanor Marsh, who hugged me for a long time and asked nothing. Paul Greer was there, near the back, dressed quietly in a dark jacket, looking like any other guest. Nathan arrived at noon with Diane. He was dressed impeccably. He hugged me and held on a moment longer than usual. You doing okay, Mom? You look tired. I haven't been sleeping well, I said, which was true. We're here now, Diane said. She squeezed my hand. Her smile was warm and her eyes gave nothing away. They took their seats near the front. Nathan sat with his arm around Diane and his hand on my arm when I sat beside him. Attentive, concerned, the picture of a devoted son. During the reception, he found me by the food table. Mom, I was thinking Diane and I could stay through Monday, help you start organizing. The Portland tenants are up for renewal in January, and we should probably talk about the long-term plan for that property. You're right, I said. We should talk about the Portland property. He relaxed slightly. I watched it happen. The small release of tension in his shoulders. He thought I was softening. There's actually something I'd like to share, I said. With everyone here, a few words about Robert's legacy, about what he built and what he wanted to leave behind. Nathan smiled. Of course. That would be beautiful. The pastor gestured to me at 2:15. I walked to the front of the room. 80 people turned to face me. I took a breath. I looked at Robert's photograph. I said, Robert Holloway was the most honest man I have ever known. And then I didn't stop. I talked about Robert for 4 minutes. I talked about what he built, what he believed, what he had said to me in the last weeks of his life. And then I said, he told me something, near the end, that I've been thinking about every day since. He said, Margaret, the thing I'm most afraid of is leaving you alone with people who don't tell you the truth. He made me promise that I would pay attention, that I would ask questions, that I wouldn't sign anything I hadn't read. The room was quiet. I looked at Nathan. He was looking back at me, very still. I want to honor that promise today, I said, in front of everyone who loved him. I nodded to Carol, who was seated near the side wall. Carol stood. She walked to a small table where Paul had set up a laptop connected to the room's presentation screen. The screen came to life. The first document appeared, the bank statements. The 11 transfers, Nathan's account number highlighted in yellow. I looked at my son. Nathan, I said. My voice didn't shake. I found the withdrawals. The room stirred. Someone near the back whispered. Nathan's face went white. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform. I spoke the same way I would have spoken to him across the kitchen table. $11,400. Taken from the account your father and I built over 40 years, in the months when we were most vulnerable. Beginning February of last year, 2 weeks after your father's first stroke, Nathan stood. Mom, this isn't. Please let me finish. He sat. Diane's hand was on the table, not touching him. The screen changed. The Portland email chain, Nathan and the realtor, the pre-listing consultation, dated while Robert was still alive. My mother left me that house, I said. She left it to me, specifically, because she knew what it meant to have something of your own. Something no one could take from you. I let that sit for a moment. You were arranging to sell it before your father was buried. A woman in the third row, one of Robert's oldest clients, made a small sound. The screen changed again. The Clearwater Capital loan, the $380,000. Nathan's name. My mother's house as collateral. You borrowed against a property you do not own, I said, using an authority I gave you in a moment of fear and exhaustion, an authority I gave you because I thought you were trying to help me. I paused. The loan comes due December 17th. You've been waiting for me to cooperate with the Portland sale so you could cover it, and if I didn't cooperate, I imagine you had other plans. Nathan was shaking now. His voice came out low and strange. You don't understand. I have debts. I needed it, was temporary. I was going to pay it back. I was going to tell you. When? I asked. He had no answer. I have one more thing, I said. I looked at the room. At Dennis Cho, who was staring at the floor. At Eleanor Marsh, whose eyes were bright with tears. At Paul, steady near the back wall. At Diane, whose hands were folded and whose face had gone very, very still. Robert told me something else, I said. He said the people who love you will protect you even when it costs them something. He said that's how you know. I looked at my son one last time. This man I had carried and raised and believed in. This stranger who had changed the locks on our lake house while I was picking out flowers for his father's funeral. Carol, I said quietly. Carol stood and addressed the room. An emergency injunction was filed this morning. All transfer activity on Mrs. Holloway's accounts and properties has been frozen. The Portland Property Management Authority is revoked, effective today. The Clearwater Capital loan is under review by the Oregon Department of Justice. Law enforcement will be speaking with Nathan Holloway regarding the unauthorized account transfers. She paused. If anyone in this room has information relevant to these matters, please see me after. Nathan stood so abruptly his chair scraped back. Two men near the door, quiet men I had asked to be there, stepped forward. They were off-duty officers, friends of Paul's. They didn't touch Nathan. They didn't need to. Nathan looked at them. Then he looked at me. I needed help, he said. You never asked if I needed help. I looked at my son for a long moment. At the boy who used to fall asleep in the car on long drives, who cried at the end of Charlotte's Web, who called his father every Sunday for 20 years without missing a single week until Robert got sick and the calls tapered off, and I hadn't noticed until right now. You're right, I said. I didn't ask. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was true. Diane left the memorial service without speaking to anyone. I didn't try to stop her. I didn't know yet what she had known or when she had known it. That would come later, in a small conference room with an attorney present, where she would say, carefully, that Nathan had presented it to her as estate planning and she had believed him, and I would sit across from her and try to determine whether I believed her, and find that I didn't entirely, and also that it ultimately didn't change very much. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple. Nothing like this is. The Oregon DOJ opened a formal investigation. Clearwater Capital, it turned out, was not merely a private lender. Paul found two other cases, a widow in Bend, a retired teacher in Eugene, where the same company had been connected to similar arrangements. The pattern was specific: a family member with authorized access, a grieving spouse, a short window between death and probate. Nathan had not invented the scheme. He had been approached. That didn't excuse what he did, but it explained, partially, why it had escalated so quickly. He had borrowed money from people who gave him a roadmap to pay it back, and he had followed it. In December, Nathan pleaded guilty to unauthorized financial transfers and misrepresentation of fiduciary authority. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, ordered to repay the $11,400, and permanently removed from any role in my estate. He did not go to prison. I told the court honestly that I did not want him to. Clearwater Capital was shut down by the DOJ in February. Two of its principals were indicted on federal charges involving multiple victims across 4 states. I sold the Portland property myself, on my own timeline, for $492,000. I put it in a trust in my own name. Structured by Carol, with terms no one could quietly alter in a filing cabinet. I changed the locks on the lake house back. I had the cedar workshop cleaned and organized. I donated 6 of Robert's pieces to institutions he had cared about. I kept 2. The one I kept for the bedroom was a small side table he'd made the year we got married. Cherry wood, hand-carved legs. He'd made it for me. I set it beside my bed and put the coffee mug on it, finely washed, because I'd decided that was a better way to keep it than leaving it in the dish rack forever. I didn't speak to Nathan for 4 months. He sent letters I read and did not answer, not because I didn't have things to say, but because I was still deciding what kind of saying it needed to be. In March, a short note arrived. 3 paragraphs. The last one said, "I think I convinced myself it wasn't really stealing because I thought you didn't need it the way I did. I thought the house and the accounts were just things you were managing, not things you'd fought for. I forgot who you were. I forgot what you and Dad built. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't fix anything." I read it in Robert's study, at Robert's desk, in the late afternoon light that came through the window he'd designed specifically to face the apple tree. I wrote back 1 page. I told him that his father had known, somewhere in those last weeks, that something was wrong. That Robert had not said Nathan's name, but had said to me, "Don't let anyone tell you what you're capable of. You know yourself." I told Nathan that I was angry in a way that would take a long time to resolve. I told him that I was also his mother, and that those 2 things were going to have to find a way to exist together, slowly, carefully, on terms I set. I did not tell him I forgave him. That would have been a lie. I told him I was still here. In April, Nathan called. It was a Sunday, the same day of the week he used to call his father. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about Robert, about what he would have done, about the fact that building things to last was a choice you made over and over, not once. I picked up. We talked for 22 minutes, mostly small things. The weather in Portland, where he was staying with a friend, a book he'd been reading. He asked about the workshop. I told him I was thinking about letting a young woodworker use the space on weekends, someone Robert had mentored before he got sick. Nathan said that sounded like something Dad would have wanted. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. We didn't fix everything. We haven't fixed everything. Trust isn't rebuilt in a phone call. But we started making something, slowly, in the wreckage of what had fallen. Something smaller than what we'd had before. More careful. Maybe, in time, more real. If you're still with me at the end of this story, I want to tell you what I actually learned. Not the lesson about reading documents before you sign them, though that matters. Not the lesson about locks and probate and fiduciary authority, though those matter too. The real lesson is this. Grief makes you trusting in the wrong direction. When you lose someone, you want to believe the people still standing beside you are there because they love you. You extend credit you wouldn't otherwise extend because you're too exhausted to be careful and because you need so badly for there to be someone you don't have to be careful with. That is not a weakness. It is human. But it is also exactly what certain people are counting on. I should have read those documents in January. I know that. But I also know that I signed them because my husband was in a hospital bed, and I had been awake for 30 hours, and my son put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I've got this, Mom, let me help." I was not foolish. I was tired and frightened, and I loved him. Don't wait for a crisis to review your own estate documents. Don't wait for a loss to take stock of who has access to what and why. Not because the people around you are untrustworthy, but because you deserve to know what you've signed, and what your name means, and what you've built and who can touch it. Robert built things to last. He built the furniture with his hands and the house with his weekends, and the marriage with 41 years of daily choosing. I am trying to do the same with what's left. It's harder without him. Some days it's very hard, but I am still here, and I am not easy to take from. Thank you for listening to the whole story. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Would you have handled it differently? Is there someone in your life you need to have a hard conversation with? And if this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you stayed with this channel. There's more to come. I'm not done talking yet.